What if I told you that the fate of the entire Second World War was decided not in Berlin, not in London, not in Washington, but in a smoking ruin on the banks of the Volga? A city turned into ash, a graveyard of entire armies, where frostbite was as deadly as bullets, and where over 2 million soldiers clashed in the bloodiest battle in human history. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Hitler had a plan. After the initial blitzkrieg into Soviet territory in 1941 failed to knock the USSR out of the war, the German High Command devised a new strategy. In the summer of 1942, while the Red Army was still reeling from catastrophic losses, Germany launched a massive offensive toward the south. The goal? Capture the oil fields of the Caucasus and cut the Soviet Union off from its energy lifeline. But there was a city in the way, an industry center on the western bank of the Volga River, Stalingrad. Was it really about oil? Or did the city's name carry a weight Hitler couldn't ignore? Was this personal? By July 1942, Army Group B, led by General Friedrich Paulus and supported by the 4th Panzer Army, was rolling through southern Russia. They met little resistance at first. Town after town fell. Soviet defenses crumbled. German troops were confident. This was supposed to be a quick, decisive push. Then, on August 23rd, the Luftwaffe unleashed hell. In a single day, over 1,000 tons of bombs were dropped on Stalingrad. Eyewitnesses described a living nightmare. Streets were engulfed in flames. Buildings collapsed with entire families still inside. Some estimates suggest over 40,000 civilians were killed that day alone. Survivors later said it felt like the gates of hell had opened. But the city didn't fall. Not yet. As German tanks rolled toward the Volga, they were met not with retreat, but resistance. Brutal, chaotic, house-to-house resistance. Soviet soldiers and volunteers, many with just hours of training, fought from basements, stairwells, rubble, even sewers. And that's when the battle changed. The Red Army adopted a simple but terrifying strategy. Don't give the enemy room to maneuver. Soviet troops stayed as close to German forces as possible, engaging in constant close-quarter combat. Grenades were thrown across hallways. Machine gun nests were hidden behind walls. Entire squads would hide in half-collapsed buildings waiting to ambush patrols. A German officer wrote in his diary, "We have taken a kitchen. The Russians are counterattacking from the cellar." By September, German troops controlled over half the city, but every inch came at a cost. Casualties skyrocketed. German supply lines stretched thin. Ammunition and food ran low. Yet Hitler insisted Stalingrad must fall. Across the river, Soviet reinforcements arrived under constant bombardment. They crossed at night, under cover of fog and artillery. Barges were sunk. Many never reached the shore. But those who did, often young, barely trained conscripts, were thrown into the front lines immediately. The average life expectancy of a Soviet rifleman at the height of the battle? 24 hours. And still, they held. Key points of resistance became legendary. The Mamayev Kurgan, a strategic hill that changed hands dozens of times. The grain elevator, where a handful of defenders held off waves of German attacks. And perhaps most famously, Pavlov's house, a single apartment building defended for 2 months by less than 30 men. Think about that. A single building held by a platoon stalled a German advance that was supposed to take all of southern Russia. By October, German forces controlled nearly 90% of the city. Soviet units were fragmented, exhausted, and pinned against the river. Supplies were low. The situation was desperate. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind the scenes, the Soviet High Command, under General Zhukov, was preparing something unprecedented. While the Germans poured men into the urban meat grinder, the Red Army massed fresh divisions north and south of the city, quietly, methodically. The plan was simple: encircle, trap, annihilate. The Germans didn't see it coming. Or rather, they didn't want to believe it was possible. After all, they were winning, weren't they? On November 19, 1942, the Soviet counterattack, Operation Uranus, was unleashed. In the north, Soviet tanks smashed through the Romanian Third Army. In the south, the same happened to the Fourth Romanian Army. These forces had been tasked with guarding the German flanks. Poorly equipped, undertrained, and demoralized, they were no match for Soviet armor. In just 3 days, the trap was closed. The German Sixth Army, over 250,000 men, was surrounded in what would become known as the Stalingrad Kessel, or Cauldron. And no one was coming to save them. Goering promised the Luftwaffe could resupply the trapped army by air, but it was a lie. At most, they delivered 100 tons per day, less than a quarter of what the Sixth Army needed to survive. Snow fell, temperatures plummeted, soldiers froze in trenches, horses were slaughtered for food, and then the dogs, and then silence. Some soldiers resorted to boiling leather belts for soup. Others rummaged through the frozen corpses of comrades, searching for crumbs, cigarettes, anything of value. Entire units vanished without orders. Despair set in. Discipline broke down. Ammunition was scarce. Medical supplies were gone. The wounded lay in makeshift shelters, untreated, dying slowly in the cold. Meanwhile, outside the encirclement, Field Marshal Manstein launched Operation Winter Storm in December 1942, a desperate attempt to break through Soviet lines and rescue the Sixth Army. For a moment, hope flickered. German armored divisions punched forward, reaching within 30 miles of the trapped troops. But Paulus, obeying Hitler's direct orders, did not attempt a breakout. He stayed put, waiting for an impossible rescue. Manstein's forces, outnumbered and overstretched, were eventually pushed back. The window closed. The cauldron froze shut. Inside Stalingrad, what remained of the once proud Sixth Army was dying. By January 1943, the situation had deteriorated beyond recognition. Starvation and disease ran rampant. The Red Army tightened the noose. Daily bombardments reduced German positions to rubble. Soviet loudspeakers broadcast messages urging surrender, promising fair treatment. Some units listened. Others chose to die where they stood. On January 31st, the inevitable happened. Friedrich Paulus, recently promoted to Field Marshal by Hitler in a bizarre attempt to ensure he would never surrender, since no German Field Marshal had ever been captured alive, did just that. He surrendered. 2 days later, the final German pockets in the northern sector fell. The Battle of Stalingrad was over. The numbers are staggering. Of the 250,000 Axis troops originally trapped in the Stalingrad pocket, fewer than 100,000 survived to be taken prisoner. Only around 6,000 would ever return home to Germany. The rest died in Soviet captivity from disease, malnutrition, and overwork. On the Soviet side, casualties were equally devastating. Estimates vary, but historians agree that more than 1 million Soviet soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing during the campaign. Civilian losses are harder to count, but likely exceeded 40,000. But beyond the body count, something else had shifted. The myth of Nazi invincibility was shattered. For the first time, Hitler's forces had suffered not just a defeat, but a catastrophe. The psychological impact was enormous. In Germany, the surrender was initially censored.
Joseph Goebbels scrambled to spin the narrative, calling it a heroic sacrifice rather than a disaster. But no amount of propaganda could hide the truth. Mothers wept. Cities fell silent. Morale plummeted.
In the Soviet Union, Stalingrad became a symbol of defiance and redemption. A city that refused to die, soldiers who stood their ground in the face of annihilation. For the Red Army, it was a turning point. From this moment on, they would not just defend, they would advance. Stalingrad marked the end of Germany's eastern ambitions. After this, the Wehrmacht would never again launch a major offensive on the Eastern Front. It was the beginning of the long, grinding push westward that would end in the ruins of Berlin. And yet, was it worth it? 2 million lives, a city reduced to ash, an entire generation traumatized. The battle was won, but the cost was incomprehensible. Could this battle have been avoided? Could diplomacy or better leadership have spared hundreds of thousands of lives? Or was this always inevitable? Two totalitarian regimes colliding in a struggle that neither could afford to lose. Even today, Stalingrad haunts us. It is studied by military academies, memorialized in films, debated by historians. It is both a warning and a legend, a testament to human endurance and to the horrors we are capable of unleashing. It was more than a battle. It was a clash of ideologies, of empires, of wills. And for one bitter winter, the world watched as those wills burned in the frozen rubble of a Soviet city. If you found this story important, if you believe history should be remembered and understood, not just memorized, then share this video, like it. Comment below, what does Stalingrad mean to you? Do you think it changed the war? Or was it just one tragedy among many? And most of all, subscribe to Hidden War Archives, because the past is not just behind us, it's still shaping our future.